Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to wake you up. Okay, about 5 years ago, I went downstairs to the kitchen one morning to make breakfast for the family, and then I suddenly sneezed, and something in my back blocked, and I fell to the floor, and I lay there. I couldn't move anymore. It was super painful, and also kind of embarrassing, to be honest. Oops, that's too far. Shit. How is that happening? Mark, what's your clicker doing? Yeah, so done, that's it. No, okay, I just do it like this. So I lay on the floor, super painful, and I seriously had to wait until my wife came down, and she picked me up and dragged me into the car, and we went to the doctor, and I got an injection, and after a couple of days I was good again. So it wasn't anything serious. I have hypermobile vertebrae, if Google got that correctly translated for me, and together with the typical fate of being an aging computer dude, I just have those accidents sometimes. And then afterwards, I went to physical therapy, and I kind of expected that it would all be about belly muscles and back muscles and exercises and homework. And I was kind of disappointed when the therapist introduced me to this weird method where I had to lie on the back and then be aware of the rotating parts in my body and then slowly move until I find a pain point and then back away from that again and then move there again and do that over and over until during such a session I would feel kind of better or move more freely. And I wasn't really sure if this is for me, to be quite honest with you. I did the 10 sessions, went home again, my back was fine again, so I forgot about it. And then a couple months later, the same thing happened. Not when I sneezed, other stupid movements, I did the same thing. And I lay there on the floor in pain again, and I tried that method. And it actually really worked. So it took a while, it wasn't a fast process, but I was able to unblock myself. I didn't need to go to the doctor once more, which was kind of an achievement. And then about 4 years ago, I saw her sitting in Stockholm in front of the parliament, and our kids were 1 and 5 at that time. And I remember that I thought initially, wow, it's kind of depressing that she feels like this about her future, that she feels like she has to protest for it. To be quite honest with you, at that point I was worried about the climate crisis, but I kind of thought of it a bit like with the ozone hole back in my teenage years. And I thought, yeah, especially with the Paris Climate Agreement, there would be now political action and it would get fixed somehow. And I also put it into the future. I'm honest here. And then in March 2019, I watched a talk by Stefan Rahmstorf of the Potsdam Institute of Climate Impact Research that he gave at the university in Karlsruhe. And he spoke about tipping points, about changes in the jet stream, about extreme weather events, and all those topics. And I don't really know what it was. Maybe his calm way to present all that, all the knowledge that oozed out of his talk, but it completely blew me away. I remember that I sat at my laptop at some point and I just actually really started crying and I couldn't stop it. For the first time, I felt deep inside how dangerous the path ahead really is. It was a similar feeling to that before. I felt blocked suddenly. In the coming 3 years, I just spent mostly in a form of shock. Yeah, it was a similar feeling to being blocked there, just lying there in pain, but this time more on a mental level. So when Mark asked me to speak here about Kirby and our work, it felt kind of wrong to do that. What we are doing there is making me happy, and it gives me a lot of joy every day, and I really like it. And I also have a wonderful family, I have a great life, and I really cannot complain. I don't want to complain at all. But there's a layer lurking underneath all that that I simply cannot ignore, especially when it's about this topic. So let's just jump right in. According to a study by the UN Development Programme and the Oxford University in 2021, with 1.2 million people participants in 50 countries, a majority of people around the world in those countries think that the climate crisis is an urgent problem. With 77% of people here in Germany, we are number 5 on that list. And these numbers seem rather implausible to me, though. I don't know about you. Despite those numbers, we still see a major lack of action in various spaces. So how can there be such a big gap between recognition and action? The climate YouTube channel of the German broadcaster Deutsche Welle, called Planet A, analyzed the TV coverage for the climate crisis in the US in 2021. National TV stations spent 267 minutes on the topic. In comparison, they spent 212 minutes on the topic of Jeff Bezos flying to space. The only problem, one is in all of 2021 and the other is in a single day. But we don't have to look at the US for that at all. So how much did you hear about the release of the latest IPCC report in April and what's in it? Or that we lost the volume of Lake Constance in water in the last 20 years here in Germany due to droughts. Lake Constance is the second largest freshwater lake by volume in Western Europe. We are amongst the areas on this planet that dry up the fastest. Those are life-changing news, often hidden below the fold or on page 2 or 3. And when this topic is absent from our public debates, it's even more so from political action. The world is nowhere near the signed goals for the Paris Climate Agreement. Our current path is heading towards 3 degrees of warming by the end of the century. We are already at 1.2 at the moment, and the IPCC models predict that we only have 3 years left to reach the peak of our emissions before we miss the 1.5 degree target, and that we only have 8 years left until we miss the 2 degree target. So just 3 years for 1.5 degrees. And I often get the feeling that people see those targets like prices on a street market. They can be negotiated, but they really can't. And all of this should make us angry and rise up. And sure, people are gluing themselves to the streets, and protesters are still protesting after 3 years, week after week. But the general public seems to react mostly with apathy or even annoyance. So how many of you honestly thought, oh, please not to talk about climate change? We know it's urgent, but we are not acting. We all know that we somehow have to turn that big inactive bubble into a bigger active bubble for a chance to preserve a livable planet. And honestly, I mostly feel that my inactions are inadequate, and I spend way too much time in that inactive circle. And that's the part of feeling helpless and being blocked. But let's have a closer look at that circle and focus on those people who have been amongst those 77% that are aware that it is a problem. There are a lot of reasons to be in that circle, and it's often simplified by saying they don't care or they just want to keep the status quo. And I think that's way too easy. This crisis is an emotional crisis. For society, it questions pretty much every part of our way of life, and that's not easy to deal with. And these reactions are not surprising, and I think everyone in here can probably find themselves in one of those groups, at least temporarily. For me personally, I often find myself switching between them. Sometimes I'm super optimistic, and the next day I just want to give up. The climate community, climate scientists and climate activists seemed to be convinced that it's all just a matter of missing information. Once we would understand the urgency at hand, change would be inevitable. And this does not seem to be true to the extent that they hope for. We live in an age of multiple crises, and as a result, we are inevitably required to find new ways to deal with them. Life somehow has to move on, or more positively, there's a lot of strength in our ability to keep on carrying on even in the darkest times. But there's a high risk of a paralyzing and numbing effect, becoming too tired or too overwhelmed by the crises. I never met more people in my life, friends, family, co-workers, members of our community, who told me that they can no longer read the news. That clicker would be really handy sometimes. And in addition to that, we all know how capable our brains are in idealizing our past. The bad memories are softened or totally forgotten. The average stuff gets a good nostalgic treatment, and the good stuff has been amplified. For me, growing up in the 90s was awesome. I just remember it very fondly. And so looking back suddenly seems so much more attractive than looking forward. But the pressure is also increasing to enjoy the present, especially after all those years, of the 2 years in the pandemic. We are longing for nice new experiences. We want concerts again, we want holidays, we want conferences, and we want to hug people and meet people, all those things that we missed. We want our normal lives back. And then there's this terrible war. Everything suddenly seems so incredibly fragile, and we want to cling to the good stuff. We are living in a time in which happiness can either be found in the past, or if we hurry up, somewhere in the present, but obviously not in the future anymore, and that's at least the message. But the climate crisis is not just an emotional crisis, it's also a communication crisis. Climate activists have been shot as the messengers from day one. Their way to address political leaders is perfectly on point. The main target audience needs all that pressure. They need to feel extremely uncomfortable every day in order to act. And it works. In just 3 years, the political debate has completely changed. But at the same time, the public can't deal with the same grim messages every day. In return, those who are fighting for us don't get the support they need. They even become public hate figures. And although it was never their message, it's automatically been translated to, they want to take our schnitzel away. So everything is framed around the principles of sacrifice to destroy their message in the news, in talk shows, in articles, and even in everyday conversations. Where activists demand collective political action, we feel attacked for our lifestyles. And this has been abused quite cleverly by those who oppose change. The more you load guilt onto each individual, the more climate activism is seen as a personal attack. By now, it's probably a well-known fun fact that the carbon footprint was an invention by Ogilvy and Martha in 2004 in a campaign for BP. And yet it's effectively shifting responsibility away from the big emitters until this day. The App Store is full of CO2 tracking apps. Instagram and TikTok are bursting with great ways to save the planet by changing our personal behaviors. It's the perfect mixture of marketing and shaming. You're a terrible human being, but you can fix it by buying our sustainable products. And thus, sustainability has become a new negative buzzword. And the greenwashers sense an easy new revenue stream. In 2020, I was invited to give a workshop at the New Adventures conference in Nottingham. And I was in the middle of that black hole that I described and in my flight shame period. And I really wanted to do something. So I decided to go there by train, which seemed absolutely ridiculous at first. But the flight connections from Heidelberg, where I live, to Nottingham are terrible anyway. So the train ride was actually just a bit longer and just slightly more expensive. And it was really, really cool. So I could go to Paris first in the TGV, which is a nice trip. And then from there, I could put a big check mark on my bucket list, go through the Eurotunnel, also fantastic. And then I ended up in London after, I don't know, 6 hours or something. And I remember that I stood there on the platform and I was waiting for the connection train to Nottingham. And then the train pulled in and I thought like, wait a second. That's a fucking diesel train. So there goes my CO2 neutral trip at that point. And the rest of the trip made up for it, though. I got to sit at a table in first class, was served an IPA by a lovely older lady that called me darling. So all my expectations, for a British train ride were completely met. And it's a funny story in hindsight, of course, but we face similar situations pretty much every day. We buy a product in good faith, or a sustainable product in good faith, just to find out that it has been shipped all around the world. And this does not mean at all that I'm against personal change, quite the opposite. But the combination of being constantly overwhelmed with our fears and a system that's not sustainable, and the guilt if we don't drastically change immediately, without a vision for a more positive future, that's just a massive shit show. So where's the light in all of this? Did I trick you maybe? I don't know. So when climate activists don't get the support they need, political action is lacking behind, society is paralyzed, and news are getting worse, where is all that light that we so urgently need? I've recently read the wonderful Book of Hope by Jane Goodall, and she hit exactly the right tone in that book for me. She says, hope is meaningless without action, but without hope we are all lost. She believes in the indomitable human spirit, and she draws hope from the actions that she sees and sparks in others, and the network effects that those actions create. The scientific evidence is clear. It's now or never, as the IPCC put it, so no pressure. But if we want to have a chance to get out of that black hole of doom collectively, I'm convinced that we need to change the way we approach this. If point A is where we are right now, and point B is where we need to be in order to keep a livable planet, then we have to start thinking more about the motivations to get there. And show possible points in between. We need to help each other on our path, and we also need to acknowledge that this path will be completely different for every one of us. For now, we don't even seem to care about A or B or the path. We fight about the shoes that we should be wearing on that trip, if we use a compass or GPS, if we should start at all, and we compete even about the path. My path is better than your path. And I don't know if I should call it funny, but it often reminds me of the fights that I've seen in the web. Framework A is better than B, and HTML is not a programming language, and tabs versus spaces. Everything is so binary and often so insignificant. Yes, there might be no time for slow changes anymore, but there's even less time to stay at point A and just keep fighting. And this fight is fueled even more by the dynamics of social media, in my opinion. It all started so promisingly, but we boiled it down to an attention economy that rewards negative news or extreme forms of voyeurism and fake realities. About 2 years ago, I had to pull out of this. I was seriously addicted to Twitter, but in a terribly burnout-y way that turned the black hole even darker for me. I could see myself becoming more and more cynical, and that kind of seemed the natural way to deal with all the shit in my timeline, and still somehow engage. I thought it would be all about humor, dark humor and snarky comments, when I was actually becoming more and more like an energy vampire. So on our journey from point A to B, we can rewire a few things, and I truly believe in that. We can rewire a few things in our brains and also in our conversations. We need practical, solution-based thinking for a future that we truly want, and we need to convince others about our visions and hopefully also create their own visions. It's kind of ironic. We are working in an industry that built its expertise around ways to convince our customers to subscribe to our services, to buy our products, to use our tools, but we somehow fail to convince ourselves and others to save our planet. We've become experts in agile processes, in optimizing personal productivity, in how to reach our milestones as a team, and maybe it's time to use that knowledge for something else. But what does the future look like in your mind? For me, that was the big question mark in those last 3 years. I could focus on the immediate future of the family instead, the school and the kindergarten years of the kids, holidays, enjoying time at home, etc. And at work we also have plenty of immediate and long-term goals for Kirby that we are looking forward to. But I mean those wild dreams when your mind starts to wander and makes all kind of plans and builds future worlds, a bit like what Doro described in her talk. Often far-fetched maybe, and naive, but still soothing and motivating. On my quest for my dreams, for my personal dreams, I ran into solarpunk. It's a pretty young utopian movement from 2008 that envisions how the future might look like if humanity succeeded to mostly solve our problems around environmental destruction, social injustice, and climate change. The genre is pretty young, and as I said, and the literature is still very limited and not always Pulitzer material, I have to say, but the ideas excited me. I'm a sci-fi fan, and I started to notice that I needed more down-to-earth alternatives to far future space adventures on different planets. And solarpunk got me into a completely new positive rabbit hole, which I'm quite thankful for. So I think it's important to explain that I would call myself a realist, or as climate activists often do, maybe a possibilist. I don't believe in magical technical solutions. I find it highly questionable or problematic when technology that is not even invented yet or physically not working out is seen as the foundation for our hope. But solarpunk shares a common theme with climate science. The energy revolution is a huge puzzle. It's not just one solution. It's not just about wind and solar and electric cars. It's about building materials, about energy storage, about new agriculture methods, public transportation, green cities, new grid technology, changes in society, etc. It's often rooted in decentralized and low-tech ideas that aren't as far-fetched as they might seem. And the results could be a lot more resilient and focused on human beings than what we currently have. And that's kind of the future I'm really looking forward to, with human beings at the center, our well-being, happiness as the indicator for growth and not the GDP. And it's important for me to mix those wild dreams and fantasies with realistic approaches and not turn too naive. But it turns out as soon as you enter that rabbit hole, there are so many great projects out there that can really inspire and are just around the corner. So it's great. Those dreams are free and they can be a big energy source. So what should point B ideally look like for you if there were no limits? I think it's a wonderful question to ask yourself, and it doesn't always have to be hyper-realistic. And for me, it was also a lot about reframing how I think about solutions that we already have. A modern offshore wind turbine only needs to turn once under good conditions to power an electric car for 100 kilometers. It needs 6 seconds for that, and it can power a small EV for an entire year within just 9 minutes. We are focused so much on the concerns right now, and that's good on one hand, because it helps to protect ourselves from obvious greenwashing. Renewable energy has its own problems, and all those other puzzle pieces for the energy revolution will have their own problems, and we should not gloss over them. But those concerns are also often abused to demonize solutions to a point where they seem to be as bad as sticking to what we have. And that's a problem in my opinion. We need better bullshit detectors. When we decided to build a solar roof, I found all those articles and calculators that helped to calculate when the solar panels will pay for themselves. In conversations with friends and family and neighbors, it was always about the same question. How long does it take for a return of investment? And is it actually worth it? So our house now produces 1.5 times the energy, and we are able to consume 70% of our own energy throughout the year. I was always a fan of the idea to plug into the endless power of the sun to get as independent as possible from the grid. And yet the gap between the concerns I had before doing my research and all those kind of nice tables that try to sell you this thing and how magical it feels afterwards is really hard to describe. Solar roofs are luckily nothing special anymore. And this is not about celebrating that we now have a solar roof, but my point is that the perception about them or about all those solutions is still completely off. We are not selling them on the same emotional level that we take for granted in pretty much any marketing campaign for our products. We managed to put more sense and emotions into the marketing campaign for a new hairdryer. It's often hard to believe in a better future when society seems so divided. And I still honestly believe that the majority of people around us are well-meaning and share the same underlying goals: health, security, freedom, happiness, love. And Rutger Bregman wrote the fantastic book Humankind, in which he debunks some of the world's most famous social studies and events that are supposed to show the ill-meaning spirit of us humans. Bregman shows how believing in human kindness and altruism can be a new way to think and act as the foundation for achieving true change in our society. I can highly recommend this book. It truly helped me to see a few things differently and more positively again. And this is another issue of social media, in my opinion, where loudness is easily confused with majority, and it's an issue of false balancing. You start to believe that society is just full of idiots by a constant misrepresentation of majorities. We are not alone, and we cannot give up just because our targets seem unreachable. How lazy is that, and what kind of message does that send to our kids and to younger generations? Or as Bernd Ulrich of the Zeit put it, resignation is an uninteresting thought pattern. He just tweeted that as a reply for a troll that tried to just say everything is doomed. And I think it was so much on point. If there's a window of opportunity for 1.5 degrees, and even if it's tiny, then we should not give up on that. And even if we should miss it someday, then the next goal is 1.500001 and not 2. It also often helped me to think of encountering resistance as a sign of change. Personal resistance is rooted in emotional struggles, and we need more empathy for those who struggle. I think that's what the circles already showed you. And systemic resistance is often even harder to bear when the direction for yourself seems so clear. Every news that go in the opposite direction are incredibly hard to swallow. There are a lot of stakeholders that want to keep everything as it is. We paid $5.9 trillion globally in fossil fuel subsidies since 2010, 440 billion just last year. And those are just the subsidies. If you would add all the costs that those solutions, that fossil fuel creates, it would be almost the same sum just in a single year. Of course, we see such dramatic forces that try to do everything they can to keep the status quo, but they are losing and they know it. You can see those 5.9 trillion as a problem for us, and that would be totally true. It really is at the moment, but you can also see it as a problem for them. Their system is only stable as long as it is massively subsidized, and that makes it incredibly brittle. We start to realize the fragility of our planetary systems, and yet we somehow take the stability of our status quo for granted. The pandemic and war gave us a glimpse into the fallacy of this concept. Things can change quickly, for the better or the worse, but there's a more positive angle to look at this. Who would have anticipated the role that remote work suddenly played before the pandemic? How quickly the public perception about how we work changed. And this is huge. It has been a catapult for change in so many places that were absolutely rigid and resistant to it before. And the same goes for the dependency on fossil energy. There's a wild chaos now how we should get off of them as quickly as possible and what are the best alternatives. But the most radical part is how the perception of ever-flowing energy changed and how we suddenly understand and question where it comes from. It's about the general way how we look at the world that matters. And that introduces an interesting question. How can we become the trigger for such positive changes that cannot be undone later without waiting for the next catastrophe? I think it's a decision between a future by design or by disaster. Next to those radical changes, in the last 2 years, we have also been seeing tons of invisible changes in the last decade. Kurz gesagt, it's a fantastic YouTube channel that breaks down complex topics into nicely animated short videos. And they recently released a video that I had to watch twice actually to fully appreciate. It talks very positively about the changes that already moved us away from the apocalypse, temperatures above 3 degrees by the end of the century. And my first impression was skeptical. Are we even allowed to celebrate yet at this point? In their video, they show that the adoption of electric cars and renewable energy is speeding up significantly, that battery technology is improving, new construction methods are invented, and more countries draw out of coal and other fossil fuel projects. Since 2010, the price for renewable energy and battery technology dropped by 85%. And that's way more than experts expected. So there are good news, and sometimes they're coming faster than people think. But I think we should also acknowledge here, again, that climate activists and climate scientists cannot use such positive news in their messages. It would totally ruin the pressure that they need so urgently. Political changes, political systems are still too slow. They need to get their act together. And that's why I don't dare to party too hard about the Kurz gesagt video. But we somehow need to learn to accept the discrepancy between the sources of hope, such like this video, and the knowledge that it's still not enough. This will follow us over the next years. We need to help up the pressure on one side, but on the other side, we also urgently need to find new ways to release that pressure for ourselves to gain new energy again. It's pretty difficult, but I think it's doable. So what's our role in this? I absolutely loved the slide by Abel and Katie of Cabeza Batata just 2 weeks ago at Beyond Tellerrand in Düsseldorf. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking that they don't have any. And it's kind of what I feel is happening right now in our industry. When I started 20 years ago, there was all the excitement and pioneering spirit about the web. We were convinced that we were working on something truly magical that could elevate society to the next level. And every idea felt worth exploring, no matter how ridiculous it was. It felt a bit like what Doro showed, all kinds of crazy ideas that suddenly came up, and you just started building and then hoped that it would work, and some died and some kept on going. It was just great. That excitement seems mostly to be gone for me. I don't have to talk more about how I see social media. At the same time, the rest of the industry professionalized, and instead of decentralization, which was such a big part of Web 2.0, even though the Web 3 guys don't want to hear that, everything centralized. The crazy ideas turned into financially attractive ideas. And a lot of the whimsical and creative spirit died. I see many of my early web icons disappear in large companies or silently working on their own or just giving up entirely. And the digital artists I've looked up to, they often get excited by the crypto world because there seems to lie a new hope for more creativity and a better chance to get rewarded for your art. And when all seems gray and cold compared to the early days, we also need to learn that the cloud now has a greater carbon footprint than the airline industry. A single data center can consume the equivalent electricity of 50,000 homes. I mentioned Rutger before and his talk about human kindness, and I have to say that I went to every Beyond Tellerrand in the last 10 years. I only skipped 2 when our kids were born, and I go there for this spark. It's really hard to describe, but it's like a battery charging station for me. This community is full of inspiring people, clever, funny, creative, and wonderful. The speakers, the attendees, even that long-haired dude sometimes. So they all share this excitement, and I see the same in our community, and I'm pretty sure you see the same in yours too. It's just often hidden below the surface. People want to create and do something good with their creations. And yes, they want to make a living, and that's priority number 1, and it always has to be. But deep down inside, we all have that wish to be fulfilled in what we do. We don't just want to come home after a terrible day and be happy that it's finally over with. And we talk a lot about personal change versus systemic change in the climate crisis. And with systemic change, we mostly mean political action. Maybe it's time to reframe that as well a bit. We are the ones who build or contribute to systems, hopefully used by hundreds or thousands or millions of people around the world, with our websites, events, applications, mobile apps, games, marketing campaigns, design work. We have direct control and power to make better decisions immediately without waiting for political action. We decided for Kirby 3 years ago that one of our first points on our journey would be to make Kirby free for all environmental projects, climate activist groups, but also students, NGOs, charities, etc. It was a super small change, just a paragraph in our FAQs. It took like 5 minutes, and now people have to apply with an email. It's a very practical process. But we learned that we totally underestimated the network effects of that change. It started slowly at first, but suddenly Fridays for Future Austria turned up, and then German Zero, and many more climate and environmental projects followed. And this introduced us to a completely new group of people. There's a very active, low-carbon web dev culture at the moment that we weren't even aware of. But we also see how the discussions in our community changed. Sustainability in web development is becoming a thing. We see more and more people asking about green hosting solutions, or how to get their sites faster, or how to improve like general stuff on their sites. And this is really cool. I want to add a disclaimer. When I'm speaking about the stuff that we are doing, I'm really not here to promote our work. I don't think that we are a role model or anything. I don't think, I feel like we are maybe halfway there on our journey, maybe a quarter. It's super hard to measure, I don't know. This will be work in progress for the next years. But I believe that we should be more transparent and honest about our actions and create believable perspectives for others. Not everyone is working on a product that has a purpose on itself. So we need to be more open about what is the purpose that we can add to our products or to our services or whatever we are working on. Climate scientists teach us about the boundaries of our planetary system, and I think it's on to us now to also learn more about the effects that our digital environments have and start improving them and teaching others. I already mentioned that the web is responsible for roughly 3.5% of global emissions. There's still very shaky data around how those emissions are spread. There are CO2 calculators that you can use for your websites to get a general overview, but it depends a lot on what kind of server architecture you're using, the tech stack, etc. So it's not really scientific yet. But one thing is clear, we have a huge problem. The average size of our sites doubled in the last 10 years. We honestly need to start thinking about digital degrowth. That's kind of a weird thought, though, when more and more parts of our lives are digitalized. But when you look at the products we build, I think it's pretty obvious that we are living in the digital plastic age. We are not building better sites than 10 years ago. The quality does not match the resources we waste. And again, keeping to the positive spirit about human kindness, and from what I can see in our work, developers aren't cruel monsters that simply throw out more digital trash for pure fun. They often either simply don't know better, or they are restricted by various constraints in their companies, or the tools and frameworks they use do a terrible job for them. And it's not just about developers. It's the marketing team, the designers, the decision makers. A lot of people are involved in order to screw things up. While researching this talk, I found this site by ARENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, and the site is incredibly interesting. It shows how geopolitical powers will shift due to the rise of renewables in the next years. But out of interest, and because I'm obviously a nerd, I opened the DevTools and I found out that the site draws down a whopping 18 megabytes per visit. So just to clarify, there's not a single video on this that's autoplaying or whatever. Nothing of that. The wind turbines move, the ships move a bit, and there are nice graphics on the site, but nothing really showed that this should be such a big site. And I'm pretty sure that ARENA is not aware of this at all. The great thing, though, we have a lot of power in our field because we can change our digital products immediately. Compare that to the aviation industry. I always loved that about the web. We trigger a new deployment or just upload something via FTP, the good old way. And then we are immediately able to improve something. And all of this is not rocket science, even if we sometimes try to pretend it is. And what I love the most, it's often also multi-solving problems. Improving performance, enhancing the user experience, making our sites more accessible and faster, protecting the privacy of our users. All of those are very closely connected and often also related to saving emissions. And there's money in that, if that's your thing. Performance specialists are highly requested experts in our industry. Tim Kratek has just been speaking 3 weeks ago at the Tellerrand in Düsseldorf, and Harry Roberts has been speaking in November. Shaving off a second from the response time in a successful shop can mean a drastic increase in conversion and therefore in revenue, and therefore there are also nice budgets. So what about a new career as performance specialist or digital emission specialist or maybe just website quality specialist? In general, I believe that we will see a lot of new career opportunities. All of those puzzle pieces for the energy revolution are not just physical products or physical things. They all require digital tools or digital ways to operate them. When I started, the combination of design and development opened a lot of doors for me. And translating between two worlds will always be a superpower. Maybe just no longer between design and development, but between design and engineering, or development and city planning, marketing and environmentalism. I think you can pretty much make up your own stuff. So let's truly extend our look beyond the tellerrand for those solutions. I think there are crazy ideas around the corner that we can look up to. By the beginning of this year, we founded a new company for Kirby. Kirby is now running for 10 years, and the time felt right to include the core team in a more meaningful way and make them true partners and shareholders of the company. And that also gave us the chance to revisit our license terms, or we had to, basically. So we decided that we want to add some red lines. Roughly based on the do no harm license, we decided to no longer sell licenses to companies that contribute to environmental destruction or climate change. And this is a choice that felt very powerful for us at that time. We are realistic about our immediate impact. Shell won't stop their operations in the North Sea just because they can't build another Kirby website. But this is a clear message to all our customers, and we really wanted to support the idea that this could become a common paragraph in software licenses, just like terms about hate speech or misogyny or racism or similar red lines that we draw. I think it's more important than ever to have some values. I immediately started to fantasize what would happen if GitHub or AWS or SAP added such paragraphs to their licenses. I mean, just think about it. Such idealistic thought experiments are, again, they are nice, but of course investors won't like the idea as much as I do. But let's have another thought experiment. What if popular open source projects, small NPM packages or big frameworks would suddenly switch from MIT to a slightly modified climate MIT or a comparable open source license? Software runs the world, and we could in theory give the big emitters a really, really hard time if we wanted. I'm just saying. Stefan Ramsdorff started his talk with this photo taken by Cassini. It shows Saturn's rings with Earth in the background, just a small blue dot in the vastness of space. I honestly believe that we are collectively facing the biggest challenge in our lives in the next decades. We need to become more resilient, but also more hopeful and inventive. And we could reframe this as the most creative challenge in our lives. Starting with tiny movements, we need to reclaim agency to move beyond feeling helpless and in shock. And the solutions are not in the metaverse, in a Mars colony, or in a crypto world, in my opinion. They are right in front of us on that blue marble. We need to protect and join those who already fight for us, and we need to find new visions for ourselves and excite others to create a bigger active circle together. We will need small solutions and big solutions. We will see fantastic changes and really scary changes. And we will make mistakes and create success stories along the way. We will feel hopeless and anxious sometimes, and we feel happy and optimistic other times. And I think it's all okay as long as we don't lose our hope for a better tomorrow. Thank you very much.